Greetings, friends. For such a time as this, we welcome stories of inspiration. And so I have a story for you today that I hope will inspire and also help us all to honor and celebrate Black History Month. It's a story of resilience, of ingenuity, and of moral rectitude. It's also a story about one of the best, one of the greatest, one of the most successful, perhaps the toughest and the gentlest lawmen of all time, Bass Reeves. In 1838, in the western part of the relatively new state of Arkansas, a child was born, free, as all children are born. But like too many, he, before he had breathed his first breath, was enslaved by the very same people who had enslaved his mother. His name was Bass. He grew up in Crawford County, Arkansas, near the bustling frontier town of Fort Smith, in the home of a man named William S. Reeves. Reeves recognized that this little boy was smart, was quick-witted, was agile, and was honest. When Bass was 8 years old, the Reeves family relocated to northern Texas, and William Reeves passed Bass down to his son, George Reeves. George was in the United States Army, and as Bass grew older, George would take him out hunting with him. He quickly recognized that Bass had an aptitude with a gun. He had a sharp eye and a steady hand and was a great marksman. And soon, George was entering Bass in shooting contests, trying to show him off to his friends. Well, as Bass grew older, he served as a stable hand. He learned the skills of a blacksmith. But in 1861, when Colonel George Reeves went off to fight for the Confederacy in the Civil War, it is believed that he took Bass Reeves with him. It is said that the two of them fought side by side at the Battle of Pea Ridge outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. That's not certain, but what is certain, that on a night in 1861 or 1862, when Bass was 23 or 24 years old, the two men played cards, got into a fight that turned into an altercation that got physical, and Bass slugged George Reeves, knocked him out. Well, when a slave inflicted physical harm on the person who had enslaved him, the penalties were severe. It meant certain death, and so Bass fled into the night. He ran to the west, to the only place where he thought he might find safety and refuge, the wild land beyond the frontier, the Indian Territory. There he met Creeks, Cherokees, Seminoles, Choctaws. People who had long memories remembered the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and the Trail of Tears that followed. They felt no affection for the white man and his law, and so they tolerated outlaws among their midst, especially outlaws who they knew to be good men, like Bass Reeves. Bass befriended and respected them as he lived among the different tribes. He learned their languages and their ways and their wisdom. He learned to read the lay of the land, both the wilderness and the settlements. He learned to live with the animals and the plants and knew which gifts and dangers they posed. He learned to listen to the secrets that were carried in the blowing of the wind and the flowing of the waters. In 1865, when the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation declared that all enslaved persons were now free, Bass Reeves was a free man. He returned to live in Arkansas. He took a wife and started a family and settled into a farm. And occasionally he went back to the Indian Territories as a guide or a translator for United States government officials who had business there. In 1875, there was a man named Judge Parker, who was appointed to oversee the Western District of Arkansas, which included the Indian Territories, and he decided to hire 200 deputy marshals to bring law to that lawless land, and one of them was Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was a towering man of 37 years. He had a dark skin and a thick, bushy mustache, and there were many who thought it was strange, unheard of, unthinkable that a black man, a formerly enslaved man, would be appointed as a deputy marshal. But Bass didn't care, and neither did the judge. The judge knew that Bass was an excellent marksman. It was said that Bass Reeves could shoot the leg off of a fly perched on a mule's ear from 100 yards away without even ruffling any of the hairs on the mule's head. And he was smart. He couldn't read very well, but he had a memory. He would commit to memory all the details of a warrant and all the details of the outlaw he was searching for. And he was clever. He would put on disguises. He would pose as a cowboy or a railway man or a tramp or a peddler selling goods. And even though he was always told to bring back his man dead or alive, Bass Reeves always tried his hardest not to use his firearm to bring the man back alive. And whenever he apprehended and arrested an outlaw, before he brought him back, he would recite or read to the best of his ability verses from the Bible. Well, there came a time when Bass Reeves was assigned to catch the worst, the meanest, the nastiest outlaw of all, a man named Jim Webb. Webb had lived a life of murder and mayhem, of license and lawlessness, of treachery and thievery. And so Bass set out to find his man. He went from town to town asking if Webb had been seen, and then when he had some clues, he looked also for hints in the landscape, abandoned campfires or signs that horses had come through. And soon enough, he saw Webb off in the distance. Oh, it was far distance. It was a mile away, but in that flat land that was only punctuated by occasional rolling hills, you could see a man at a mile's distance, and you could see the puffs of dirt set up by the horse's hooves. And Jim Webb saw that now Bass Reeves was on his tail. And so the chase began. Both men had two horses because that's how they did it in those days. You would have one that you would ride and then another that followed behind, and when the first one got tired, you dismount and get on the second one. And Bass followed Webb, and every time Webb got off of his horse, Bass would get off and get on his other. Bass knew that as fast as his horses were, that Webb's could be just as fast, and he would never catch him that way. Well, he remembered something that a Comanche had told him. A Comanche who had come from the west. The Comanches were a tribe that lived further west, and they were known to be great horsemen. And one had come among the creek that Bass had lived with when he was a younger man, and had taught Bass a very important piece of information, that it's easier to run uphill than downhill. Now, this might seem strange because you'd think that it's easier to run downhill because gravity is pulling you down. And it is a little bit easier on your lungs and on your heart, but it's harder on your legs. And what's true for a man is also true for a horse. Bass remembered this. And so, anytime he was coming down a hill, and Webb was ahead going down another hill and couldn't look back and see him, Bass would dismount and thus spare his horses the extra strain. And so little by little he caught up. Every time he was out of sight, he'd dismount and let his horses go downhill without him. Webb could see that Bass was catching up, and he had no idea how the lawman was doing it. But it was no use, because eventually Bass Reeves caught up with him. Now, some say that there was a horrible gunfight and that Reeves killed Jim Webb. Others say that Bass Reeves apprehended him, and before he brought him in, he most certainly read him and recited him a bit of the Bible, hoping to bring a hint of redemption to the dark heart of this hardened outlaw. It's said that during the course of his 30-year career as a deputy marshal, that Bass Reeves apprehended 3,000 outlaws and only ended up killing 14. Well, in 1907, when Oklahoma became a state after 32 years as a federal deputy marshal, Bass Reeves retired. He ended up serving in the Muskogee, Oklahoma Police Department, but by that time he was in his 70s. He was an old man in suffering health, and in 1910 he died. Oh, but what a life he had, a life of resilience, of ingenuity, and of moral rectitude, a life that can be an inspiration to us all for such a time as this.